Hi, this is Ellen Brock, freelance novel editor. In this video, I want to talk about how you can spot a bad scene or chapter. And by a bad scene or chapter, I mean one that you would probably want to cut from your novel or maybe just change in some way to make it more interesting or exciting. The most common reason you would have a bad scene or chapter in your novel is because you're trying to convey some sort of information, but there isn't actually anything going on in this section or chapter other than conveying that information. So maybe you have a scene where you're trying to introduce a character, but nothing actually happens in the scene other than introducing that character. So maybe your protagonist has a best friend and you want that to introduce the best friend at this point in the book, so they just go to the mall. Well, maybe nothing happens at the mall, there's no conflict, it doesn't move the plot forward. That's a bad scene or chapter, that's one that you would want to cut. You might also want to be conveying some kind of information about the plot or a personality trait of the character. So maybe the character talks to somebody and the other person gives them information. If that information is given directly and freely and there's no conflict or difficulty in obtaining the information, it doesn't make for a very interesting or exciting scene or chapter, so that's not ideal. So what you want to do is you want to have a conflict in every scene in your novel. And the conflict just means that your character wants something, but something is standing in the way of them getting what they want. So long as you have a conflict in the scene, it will keep readers engaged and interested, which is what you want. You can test whether or not there's a conflict in your scene pretty easily. All you have to do is ask yourself, what does my character want? If they just want to go to the mall, it's okay, but there has to be the other piece of a conflict, which is something standing in the way of what they want. So if your character wants to go to the mall, so they just go to the mall and nothing stops them, then there's not a conflict. You only have the first piece, what the character wants, and not the second piece, something standing in their way. The other thing that can make a scene or chapter not very good is if what the character is trying to accomplish is accomplished too easily. Even if there is a conflict, if that conflict seems superficial or very easy to overcome, it's not very satisfying to the reader. The other reason that a scene could not work out very well or could be considered bad is if it isn't required to tell the story. Maybe there is a conflict, maybe your character wants something and they can't get it and they put all this effort in, but maybe that chapter doesn't really have any relevance to the rest of the plot. So you can figure that out pretty easily. Just go through your novel scene by scene and take a scene out and then read it without that scene and then ask yourself, is it confusing? Would readers have a hard time understanding what's going on? If not, then you really don't need the scene, and anytime you don't need some piece of writing, you should cut it because you don't want to slow your pacing down with scenes that aren't necessary. You should also look out for scenes where there's conversation going on that doesn't really mean anything. This can happen a lot, especially early on before the conflict is introduced or before the catalyst, where characters are sort of talking to each other, but what they're saying isn't really important and it doesn't really matter or move the plot forward. You can always trim that down if the surrounding scene is important, but sometimes it can be deceiving and a conversation really isn't necessary and isn't really getting you anywhere. So make sure that you're asking yourself those questions. Does this really matter? If I take this out, does it really affect the plot? Would the reader really be confused? Or do I just like the scene for a different reason? Because as writers, sometimes it's easy to fall in love with a scene and really want to keep it, but it's not really necessary. We just like it. You never want to keep a scene just because you like it. So those are some easy ways for you to identify a scene or chapter that's not doing your novel justice, one that you would probably want to cut out. If you have any ideas for other videos, please let me know. I know I've got a lot of requests to make videos in general, but not really asking for anything specific. So if you have any specific ideas, let me know. It's easier if you send me an email, and I'll put my email and my website at the end of the video. I don't check Google Plus that much, so I don't see the comments on the videos a lot, unfortunately. So thanks for watching, and I hope these tips help you to spot and clean up some bad scenes and chapters.